And I'm going to stay pretty close to my notes today. And I want to begin by sharing this slide with you this morning. For you psychology would-bes, this is not a Rorschach test. Actually, that's a slice of a piece of brain, a temporal lobe. And it's not just any brain. It's a slice of Albert Einstein's brain. And though Einstein died in 1955, Thomas Harvey did an autopsy on him after he died, and he wound up keeping a slice of his brain in a bottle until 2007. I don't know if that was legal or not. I guess it was. Then, at that time, Lucy O'Rourke Adams acquired the slice of brain and donated it to the Mutter Museum of the College of Physicians in Philadelphia in 2011. The story came out in the Philadelphia Inquirer while Janet and I were living there, and I was just immediately fascinated that, hey, we still have some of Albert Einstein around. That just seemed to be amazing to me. When I was growing up, Einstein's name was, in the science world, he was certainly the top of the list. His name was synonymous with intelligence around the globe, and even now, 60 years later, his name is still very much talked about. Any exploration of things that involve physics, his name is often mentioned. So the idea that we could still possess a little piece of him, his brain, there is just amazing to me. And you know, I never knew much about Einstein other than all of the great things I heard about that he did in science, but he seems to be kind of humble, I think, because this quote kind of indicates some things about him. We have been endowed with just enough intelligence to be able to see clearly just how utterly inadequate that intelligence is when we're confronted with what exists. And so he understood that there was a lot of stuff that he didn't know. And so I think he could have really added there compared to the wisdom of God. So another clipping here from the paper, a little 2 or 3 years later, and I want to say up front, this is not a lesson on science in the Bible. I want to get us thinking about the mind and what we put in the mind and so on. So I have no qualifications for science or math. I'm more to the art side of things. But in 2012, there was a huge amount of writing about the Large Hadron Particle Collider. Some of you science buffs probably know a lot more about that than I do. It was built in Geneva, Switzerland, the world's largest atom smasher, which would unravel Earth's mysteries, they thought. Here they discovered the Higgs boson, a fundamental particle which they expected to provide tremendous enlightenment for the world. Now, I haven't heard too much since then. Some of you science people can enlighten me about whatever they found since they've been doing these experiments. But scientists immediately started talking about how we will soon learn the origins of mankind, how the world was created, the man's great genius is going to be known. Theologians, on the other hand, were writing and warning that the findings will probably not be what scientists were hoping to learn. And no matter what they learn, God is ultimately the creator, and I'm there. So here's that collider. And so as we, this is an amazing thing. I think it's 17 miles long or something like that. It's an amazing piece of science, cost a lot of money. So here's the next thing I want to share with you that I learned a couple of weeks ago. Maybe some of you also heard it on the news. The greatest scientific project underway in the world today was thwarted recently by the small animal. Yes, he closed down the $7 billion collider. He humbled some of the greatest scientists on the planet. The weasel chewed through a major electrical cable. I say it's a weasel. They found parts of an animal, and they weren't exactly able to define it, but they think it was a small weasel. And so chewed through this electrical cable that powered the $7 billion project and stopped this huge collider from working. And one scientist said, it's unclear whether the animals are trying to stop humanity from unlocking the secrets of the universe. So I thought that was an interesting observation. They've had several incidents of animals halting their progress in different ways, and there's also a collider in Illinois that's also had some interesting experiences like this. So it all reminds me of going back to Adam and Eve. They were tempted to partake of the tree of life. They wanted to become wise, become more like God. Also reminds me of the sons of Noah building the Tower of Babel. They wanted to build this tremendous structure that would make a name for themselves. And so this is the way that we human beings are. We're always looking for something to make a name for ourselves. And in so many cases, God is ignored. His great wisdom and all that he does is forgotten. So our world today, I think, seems quite messed up in so many ways. The root of the problem, I believe, is we believe we have become wiser than God. We do not really need him so much anymore. You see so many people around us that don't seem to need him anymore. At least they think they don't need him. Reality is that we need him more than ever. And just remember Ecclesiastes 1 and 2. Meaningless is what Solomon was saying as he looked at the world and saw all was meaningless. I don't know all of what Solomon was seeing in that, but he saw a lot of futilities in his own life, and sometimes we see a lot of futilities as we're looking at life, and so all can just seem to be meaningless. But when we see things happening, like we watch the news, we see a dramatic increase in murders in a lot of the big cities across the country. Detroit's doing a little better. I heard a nice report last night, but we're not doing so well even at that. But maybe in comparison, we're doing better. But a lot of bad things are happening out there. And we look at war. You know, after all these years, war hasn't gotten any better. We see terrorism. We see declining moral values around us, greed, lack of honesty, lack of trust. So all of these things are still very much a part of the world around us. So the reality is we don't see a lot in our culture around us that's truly encouraging. And the only encouragement I see from day to day is when I see people like you, people of God, whose lives depend on God, those lives who have been changed to live according to Christian values, and you're training your children to live by a different standard. Those without God simply struggle in a world that has no consistency and no standards. And people who have no standards or values tend to lose hope. So the Apostle Paul understood this when he was speaking to the Corinthians. And he says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. I am for scientific progress and achievement when God is glorified in the progress, when we're doing things to make improvements in His earth. Those things are good. But I'm not when it's only for self-gratitude and realizing that so many things are done that's destroying God's earth. The mind's an amazing thing that God created in us, His people. In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, he knew the Corinthians considered themselves a people of wisdom and culture. They were diverse in makeup. They had a lot of wealth. They were not the most elite people, but they were moving upwards, and that was their desire and goal, and kind of like a lot of people in our society today. But Paul took time with them to put things about life in perspective. He wanted his audience to understand the difference between wisdom and foolishness. And wisdom is when we follow the things that God has given to us to follow. Sometimes it's just hard to know the difference between wisdom and foolishness. And sometimes we think we're doing things that are kind of smart when they're not very wise. And in our text today, Paul tells us how we can escape human thinking and transform our minds and our lives. And this is so important. In Romans 12:2, it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." We need to renew our mind so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. We need new minds. We need a new way of thinking that helps us to access the power of God. All of us probably know someone out there who's struggling to just live life every day. And those who struggle are usually looking at life in terms of what the world offers for them, not what they can do for God. And until we allow our minds to be transformed in the very image of Christ, it's very difficult to live in this world as we do not have the tools that God has given us to survive this world. And if we join the world, we're never going to have any peace, I truly believe, in this world. So I've known people in life who have changed some parts of their lives, but I've never allowed God to do a total makeover. So this is a really important point that I want to make today, that sometimes we make some changes in our lives to make ourselves acceptable to those around us. But sometimes we have that one or two secret sins over here. We don't want people to know about them, but we do so much to focus on those things in our lives in a secret way. And that kind of thing can be disastrous. Sometimes a person thinks they're in pretty good shape, but have that one thing that's tearing them down. I want to tell you a story about a friend this morning. A friend by the name of John who had this problem. This was someone that I knew back in Pennsylvania. I knew John for many years, probably 40 years or so. He preached for a church in Pennsylvania for 25 years. I knew his family, I knew his parents, knew his wife, his children. I've golfed with John. I even mentored him in fundraising. He wanted to go into campus ministry, and he had to raise his salary to do that, so I helped him to get ideas for fundraising. John had a great personality. He exhibited Christian traits, just like we all do as we greet each other, but he was also seen as a church leader. He was kind of thought of as a pillar of the church in that region. And you would have thought of him as someone that this is the good model I should be following. One day someone pointed me to an article about John in the newspaper. I was totally stunned. There was a side of John that I'd never known. Without going into detail, John was discovered to be a pedophile. It had secretly consumed his life for years. And what I suddenly realized was that he was secretly living a very disgusting life that nobody knew about. John was eventually given a prison sentence. He had over 200 offenses, according to the papers. He's now been in prison for about 4 years and will likely never get out. When I saw the article, I thought, well, I'll never see John again, never talk to him. Was hoping certainly that I'd never have to confront John. But he wrote me a very long letter from prison, acknowledged his sin. It was very hard to write him back, but I knew that I needed to do that as a Christian friend, because even his children were refusing to talk to him. John's story, if you've been reading the Christian Chronicle the last few years, you would know who John is, because he was on, I think he's been on the front page of the Christian Chronicle a couple of times. Once because of the enormity of what happened, and secondly, his son is actually preaching in the same church that John preached in for 25 years. His son is doing a wonderful job. But he's actually, through the Christian Chronicle, he was warning, we always have to be on guard, because there are people like my dad around, so you can't just go through life not being on guard. So just a few days ago, I received another 8-page letter from John. He's had a reasonably adjusted life in Rockview Prison, which he affectionately calls Camp Rock Bottom. He's established a lot of friendships in there. He's met a lot of believers in there, and he has become very involved. He's taught Bible classes. He's actually created Bible class lessons that he's sent out to churches where he's previously preached for. So he's trying to do a lot of the right things. He's in the prison choir. He tells me about all the things he does, and I get tired just imagining all the things that he's doing. It's as though this has become his mission in life now. But I'm not sure that John has shed all the baggage. I think if John were back out where he once was, he might still be doing the same things. I don't know. But there are some things that make me think that could be true. So John apparently intended to make a real transformation in his life at one time, but only cleaned part of the closet. This is really important to understand, that transformation involves totally turning over our minds to God and allowing His Spirit to reside there every day. If we only do it halfway, we're going to still have issues. I believe total transformation is not always immediate. I believe it's an ongoing process for most people. But we have to stay close to God and allow Him to work in us. We can't do it alone. First Corinthians 2:16, for who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. Paul is saying we have the mind of Christ. Isn't that really exciting? If we really have gone through the transformation, if we have allowed God to change us to be like him, we can have the mind of Christ. What a wonderful thought. So when Jesus calls us to be his children, he calls us to become like him, to learn to think like him. And God's teaching us that we're truly transformed. We have that great opportunity to acquire the mind of Christ. Paul, this one's for you. Last Wednesday we were talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson in class. He had some interesting writings, and so I told Paul after class, I'm using a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson today, and I think it's a really good quote. You've probably heard it before, and I think it's logical in ways, but it's a short quote. A man is what he thinks about all day long. A man is what he thinks about all day long. So isn't that so true? If we really put our focus on something, we're thinking about it all day long. If we're excited about it or whatever that focus is, that's what we're going to become. And so that's why it's so important that we develop this mind of Christ through just letting his word sink into our lives and staying close to him in prayer and just doing things to reinforce. And so thought I had another slide coming up there, but that one's for later. Paul tells us that we possess the mind of Christ, but don't reject it, don't lose it. Let Christ's mind control and rule over every thought. The Bible tells us 4 things that we need to do to help our minds become one with the mind of Christ. And so I'm going to give you these. There's 4 brief scriptures. Colossians 3:2, therefore, since you have been raised with Christ, strive for the things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died and your life is now hidden with Christ. Our minds should focus on the things that are going to build us up in our lives. We don't get focused on the things that are going to tear us down. We need to prayerfully allow God to direct our thinking and our thought patterns, our life. Do not resist his direction for your life. Secondly, from our scripture today, do not be conformed to this world. Do not think in worldly ways. Focus on the heavenly ways. Prayerfully allow God to direct our lives, and don't resist that direction. 1 Peter 1:13, therefore with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. So don't let the world latch on to us. It's so easy for that to happen. We need to be alert. We have to stay alert and do not allow the evil to come in and penetrate our lives. 1 Corinthians 2:4 and 5, my message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power, just like we talked about in the beginning, where sometimes we're just going out on our own using human wisdom. We need God's power to make our lives develop with the minds of Christ. So fill our minds with the right things. Don't let the world diminish God's power in your life. Have you ever seen a metamorphosis? This is not a great picture. It's kind of pixelated, but you see a metamorphosis happening. We probably have seen this with like a monarch. An ugly caterpillar turning into a beautiful butterfly. Our lives can be a metamorphosis, and so we've got to turn our lives over to God and let Him make this metamorphosis through transforming us. So our lives can go from being ugly to beautiful, just like the butterfly. Oops. Go back to the butterfly, beautiful butterfly. So each stage of this metamorphosis doesn't come easy. The caterpillar struggles to go from caterpillar to cocoon to butterfly, and if we simply drift to the lowest possibilities, our lives will never change. But let's be like this butterfly. So it takes time to clean a messy closet, and God does not expect perfection overnight, but He expects us to start doing our cleaning and then not let up until we have it all cleaned and continue to keep working on it each day. So through the power of God and the Holy Spirit, we can be transformed into His likeness. That's what this lesson is all about. The song says, love takes time, but God's love transcends all time, and His love is the power to transform lives. So today, you can begin the transforming process by just recognizing that there are problems there that need to be addressed. If you've never started that process, today's a good day to start. If you need help in some way, please turn to the church for prayers and help to get there. And so today, you can be transformed in your life through the precious blood of Jesus. And so now we're going to have a song, and if you need help in some way, we're here to serve you and help connect you with God in a better way so that this transforming power can work in your life. So come as we stand.